She's turned Prince Harry into a man of non-substance. It just struck me as like completely empty.
California was supposed to be Harry and Meghan's final escape, a sunlit kingdom beyond palace control. But behind the gates of their carefully protected life, confidence had begun turning into fear. Powerful allies were disappearing, and one private conversation raised an unthinkable possibility, leaving America behind. To the outside world, California still represented freedom. It was the place where Harry and Meghan had escaped royal duty, palace restrictions, and the silent rules that had followed every movement they made in Britain. Here, they could choose their own projects, tell their own story, and build an identity that did not depend on permission from the crown. But privately, that freedom was beginning to feel dangerously conditional. California had never been just another address. It was their rebellion made permanent. For Meghan, it was a return to the world she understood, a place where ambition was praised rather than restrained. She believed they could become more powerful outside the monarchy than they had ever been within it. Harry had believed something simpler. He believed distance would finally bring peace. Yet the first warning signs arrived quietly. Major plans slowed. Trusted relationships became less certain. Invitations that once seemed automatic became harder to predict. The excitement surrounding their royal departure began to fade, and Hollywood's fascination with palace conflict appeared to be losing its force. The world had listened to their pain. Now it wanted something new. That demand weighed heavily on Meghan. America had once celebrated her independence, but celebration came with a price. She was expected to keep evolving, revealing, producing, and proving. Every silence created questions. Every delayed project became a headline. Every attempt at privacy risked being interpreted as weakness. Harry's struggle was different, but no less painful. He had left Britain believing he was protecting his family, yet he now seemed trapped between two worlds. America did not fully understand the emotional weight of the monarchy, while the royal family no longer trusted his intentions. He had escaped the palace, but not its shadow. Their independence also carried enormous financial and reputational pressure. Security, property, staff, public appearances, and professional commitments required them to remain visible and commercially valuable. The private life they claimed to want depended on maintaining a public presence they could never completely control. The arguments inside their home were no longer about whether California was perfect. That illusion had already vanished. The real question was whether remaining there had become dangerous to their brand, their security, their family, and perhaps even their relationship. Then, during one private conversation, another country was mentioned. Not Britain. Not a surrender to royal authority. A quieter place connected to the earliest days of their escape, where they had once hidden from palace pressure and briefly believed a different life was possible. And as the California dream began cracking beneath them, Harry reportedly found himself thinking about the last place where escape had still felt possible before deals, accusations, and royal retaliation changed everything. Before California became their promised land, Canada had been their hiding place. It was where Harry and Meghan first tested life beyond palace walls, where silence felt protective rather than threatening, and where, according to those watching closely, they left behind an unfinished plan they never expected to reconsider. Canada had once stood between two lives. Behind them was the monarchy, with its rigid expectations, guarded conversations, and invisible lines they were never supposed to cross. Ahead of them was complete independence, though neither Harry nor Meghan fully understood what that freedom would demand. For a brief period, Canada gave them distance without forcing them into another machine. For Meghan, the country already carried a sense of familiarity. She had worked there, built friendships there, and learned how to exist beyond the constant pressure of royal judgment. It offered access to North America without the relentless hunger of Los Angeles. There was ambition, but less spectacle. Privacy, but not total isolation. At one point, they allegedly believed it could become permanent. They imagined raising their family away from palace control while still preserving selective ties to public service and the Commonwealth. It appeared to offer the balance they had been searching for, close enough to remain relevant, distant enough to breathe. But that fragile possibility collapsed. Security became uncertain. Media attention intensified. Negotiations with the palace grew bitter, and every decision seemed to carry a hidden condition. Then California emerged with something Canada could not match: global visibility, major commercial opportunities, and the promise of building an empire entirely on their own terms. The difference soon became impossible to ignore. Canada had offered quiet. California demanded performance. In Montecito, success depended on remaining visible, productive, and emotionally available to an audience that constantly wanted more. Harry remembered Canada as the last chapter before complete estrangement. Back then, he had not yet lost all hope of repairing the damage with his family. His title still felt like a bridge rather than a burden, and the palace conflict had not hardened into something cold and permanent. Meghan's memories were more complicated. Canada had protected her, but it had also reminded her that powerful decisions about her future were still being made elsewhere. She had been safer there, yet not fully in control. Even after they left, certain relationships reportedly remained intact. Quiet contacts, trusted friends, and possible logistical connections were never completely abandoned. They existed in the background, unnoticed but available. Then, as pressure mounted in California, one question finally surfaced between them, not as a plan, but as a confession. What if they had chosen the wrong destination? That question might have remained an expression of frustration until a series of setbacks in California allegedly transformed Canada from a memory into a serious escape route. Harry and Meghan had not simply moved to California, they had attempted to construct a rival royal court built on global attention, media power, and personal truth. But when the deals weakened and public sympathy shifted, the foundations of that new empire began collapsing faster than either of them expected. Their ambitions had once seemed limitless. There were major entertainment agreements, high-profile speaking opportunities, charitable campaigns, and the promise of becoming something the monarchy could never control. A modern, emotionally open power couple with influence far beyond palace walls. They would not merely survive their royal departure. They would prove that leaving had made them stronger. At first, their connection to the crown opened every door. Audiences wanted the private story behind the public rupture. They wanted palace secrets, emotional wounds, hidden rivalries, and the truth about what had driven Harry and Meghan away. Their pain became their greatest source of attention. But that advantage carried a dangerous contradiction. The more they tried to separate themselves from royal life, the more their relevance seemed to depend on it. Every criticism pulled them back toward the institution they claimed to have escaped. Every attempt to build a new identity revived questions about Charles, William, protocol, titles, and betrayal. Eventually, the most explosive experiences had already been discussed. New projects needed to succeed without another palace revelation, yet audiences still expected confession, conflict, and access. Silence created disappointment. Repetition created fatigue. The very story that had launched their independence was beginning to trap them. For Harry, the cost was deeply personal. Each retelling of royal pain may have strengthened their public position for a moment, but it widened the distance between him and the family he had once known. His relationship with Charles weakened. His bond with William hardened into distrust. The world that shaped him began closing its doors. Meghan responded with determination. She wanted to prove their success did not depend on royal approval. Yet every delayed project, changing agreement, or public criticism was treated as evidence that their freedom was failing. Behind the scenes, strategies reportedly began colliding. Advisors changed. Some argued for greater visibility, others urged silence. Meanwhile, the expense of security, staff, property, and constant relevance made retreat almost impossible. Then came one professional disappointment that struck harder than the others. It forced them to confront what they had resisted admitting. California no longer guaranteed influence, stability, or protection. Canada, however, offered something Los Angeles could not: a retreat that did not look like a return to Britain. Then, during a private discussion about money, security, and their children's future, the question became a proposal, and the proposal carried one destination neither Harry nor Meghan could easily dismiss. The conversation reportedly began behind closed doors, without advisors, cameras, or carefully prepared statements. Harry raised the possibility first, or so insiders believed. Canada, he suggested, could offer them safety, distance, and a new beginning. Meghan did not reject it. Her response changed the entire direction of their future. For the first time, Canada was no longer being discussed as a comforting memory. It had become a genuine option. Harry and Meghan were now seriously considering leaving California and creating a primary or semi-permanent home across the Canadian border while keeping selected professional ties to the United States. It would not be a sudden disappearance. It would be a controlled retreat, carefully designed to preserve their public influence while protecting their private life. Harry was reportedly drawn to the idea immediately. Canada remained familiar, connected to the Commonwealth, and distant enough from Britain to avoid the appearance of surrender. More importantly, it offered something California no longer did: distance from Hollywood's constant judgment. There, he could remain visible without being endlessly measured against deals, headlines, and celebrity expectations. Meghan's reaction was more cautious. A return could easily be portrayed as defeat. Critics would say the American dream had collapsed, that their grand promise of independence had failed, and that they were quietly moving backward after years of presenting California as their final destination. But her resistance allegedly weakened as deeper fears took over. Privacy had become harder to protect. Their professional future felt less stable. Their children were growing up inside an environment shaped by relentless speculation. The family had escaped royal pressure only to become trapped inside a different publicity machine. Possible locations were quietly considered. Vancouver Island offered seclusion and the emotional comfort of their first escape. Toronto offered Meghan familiar friendships, professional connections, and a more active public life. Neither option was settled, but both carried serious advantages. Then came the practical questions: schools, security, property access, travel routes. Could Harry reach Britain more easily from Canada without appearing to return to royal territory? Could they keep American partnerships while removing their family from California's pressure? Only a trusted few allegedly knew. An early leak could frighten business partners, attract unwanted attention, and provoke the palace before Harry and Meghan had agreed on the final shape of the move. The symbolism made the decision even more dangerous. Returning to Canada would rewrite the entire story of their departure and suggest that their original refuge had been wiser than the empire they tried to build in America. Harry reportedly wanted to act before another setback removed their choices. Meghan wanted the move to appear strategic, powerful, and deliberate, not desperate. Yet one uncertainty overshadowed everything. Canada could carry them away from California, but it might also pull them closer to the monarchy they had fought so hard to escape. And once whispers of the Canadian plan reached figures connected to Britain, the possible relocation stopped being a private family decision. It became a new battle over loyalty, image, and royal control. To the palace, a Canadian return could look like retreat, reconciliation, or something far more dangerous. Harry and Meghan would once again be living inside the Commonwealth's symbolic orbit, close enough to influence the royal narrative, yet distant enough to operate beyond the Crown's control. Inside royal circles, the possibility carried two completely different meanings. A quieter life in Canada could reduce the public attacks, soften the hostility, and create space for Harry to rebuild contact with his father. But it could also restore something the palace believed had been weakened: the couple's connection to a nation where royal symbolism still mattered. That was where the concern began. Harry and Meghan would not need official palace approval to appear charitable, influential, or royal adjacent. With their titles, international profile, and carefully chosen public causes, they could present themselves as a modern commonwealth, facing couple without accepting the discipline, restrictions, or supervision of working royal life. William allegedly viewed the situation with greater suspicion. To him, Canada might not look like an escape at all. It could look like a strategic repositioning, one that allowed Harry to rebuild public relationships while remaining protected from the responsibilities and scrutiny that came with serving the crown. The issue of titles made everything more sensitive. Harry and Meghan's royal identities still shaped their visibility. A return to the Commonwealth's orbit could reignite the argument that they continued benefiting from the institution while refusing the duties attached to it. Charles, however, faced a more painful conflict. As a king, he had to protect the monarchy from confusion and embarrassment. As a father, he could not ignore the possibility that Canada might bring Harry closer, geographically, emotionally, and perhaps eventually personally. Any palace cooperation would almost certainly carry conditions. Fewer interviews, less commercial use of royal connections, absolute privacy around family conversations. What looked like assistance could quickly become another system of control. The children added even greater emotional pressure. Their education, titles, connection to Britain, and possible life in Canada could become powerful leverage in any attempt to repair the family divide. Meghan reportedly distrusted that possibility from the beginning. She feared that palace support would arrive with invisible strings, restrictions on her voice, pressure on Harry, and an effort to define the relocation before she could explain it herself. Behind closed doors, aides began preparing for every outcome: a permanent move without reconciliation, a temporary refuge, or a request from Harry for renewed protection and access. And beneath it all was the threat of a leak. Whoever revealed the story first could label the move as failure, surrender, strategy, or royal return. But the palace was not the only force capable of disrupting the plan, because within Harry and Meghan's private discussions, two very different visions of Canada were beginning to collide. Harry saw Canada as a place to breathe. Meghan saw it as a decision that could either rescue their future or destroy the image she had fought to build. They agreed that California was failing them, but behind that agreement lay a deeper conflict over what their next life should become. For Harry, the appeal was simple and deeply personal. He wanted quiet. He wanted protection for his family, fewer commercial demands, and a home where every decision was not judged against Hollywood success or royal failure. After years of interviews, legal battles, painful revelations, and public conflict, he was reportedly exhausted by a life that seemed to require constant confrontation. Meghan viewed the same move through a different lens. Canada could not look like an escape made under pressure. It had to become a reinvention, carefully timed, professionally useful, and strong enough to silence those waiting to call their American chapter a collapse. That difference shaped every discussion. Harry imagined a secluded home, limited appearances, and enough distance to rebuild a private life. Meghan imagined selective Canadian partnerships, carefully controlled projects, and a public strategy that would turn relocation into expansion rather than retreat. She feared silence because silence allowed others to speak for them. Without a clear explanation, critics could describe the move as exile, professional defeat, marital strain, or a desperate attempt to move closer to royal relevance. Harry, however, had begun to believe that the endless effort to control every headline was part of what had trapped them. Their memories of Canada also pulled them in opposite directions. Harry remembered protection, unity, and the last period when he and Meghan seemed to be moving together toward the same future. Meghan remembered safety too, but she also remembered uncertainty, security fears, tense negotiations, and the painful knowledge that their lives still depended on decisions made elsewhere. Even their advisors were reportedly divided. Some believed relocation would restore mystery and soften the couple's image. Others warned that leaving California could weaken vital relationships with American executives, donors, and influential friends. Beneath those arguments was a question neither could avoid. Had California truly been the mistake, or had they placed expectations on it that no country could ever satisfy? Harry may also have seen Canada as a bridge toward his family. Meghan feared that bridge could slowly become a road back to the institution they had escaped. The disagreement allegedly reached its breaking point late one night. Harry insisted they needed peace before chasing another professional victory. Meghan argued they needed one undeniable success before leaving, or the world would say they had been forced out. For a moment, the entire plan appeared ready to collapse. Their disagreement exposed the truth beneath the relocation plan. Canada could save their marriage, their family, and their public image, but only if the outside world allowed them to reach it intact. Only a handful of people allegedly knew Canada was being considered, yet questions began circulating before any decision was announced. Someone had spoken, or someone had guessed correctly. Suddenly, Harry and Meghan faced the same danger that had followed them from palace corridors to California. Their private future was becoming public property. The first signs were subtle. Reporters began asking unusual questions about old Canadian contacts. People linked to Harry and Meghan's earlier stay were quietly approached. Interest returned to places and relationships that had remained ignored for years. Nothing had been confirmed, yet someone appeared to know where to look. Distrust spread immediately. Meghan allegedly suspected that information had escaped through professional circles in California, where advisors, executives, and associates were already debating the couple's next move. Harry feared something more personal, that details had traveled through mutual contacts and reached royal aides before he was ready to speak. The leak threatened more than privacy. American partners could interpret a Canadian move as a withdrawal from Hollywood. Potential supporters in Canada might hesitate if the relocation began to look politically sensitive or connected to a new struggle with the crown. Then came the narratives they had feared. Meghan would be accused of fleeing professional failure. Harry would be portrayed as drifting back toward the Commonwealth. Their finances would be questioned. Some would even suggest that Canada represented a quiet separation between their family life and their professional ambitions. Meghan reportedly wanted to act before those stories hardened. She considered presenting Canada as an expansion of their international life, a second North American base, not an abandonment of the United States. The message had to be strong, controlled, and impossible to mistake for defeat. Harry resisted. He remembered what had happened when announcements moved faster than negotiations during their royal departure. Public statements had created pressure, hardened positions, and turned private disagreement into open warfare. He feared they were about to repeat the same mistake. Meanwhile, quiet warnings allegedly arrived from figures connected to the palace. Any attempt to use royal titles or Commonwealth symbolism around the relocation could trigger a stronger response from Britain. Security concerns deepened the panic. Once possible locations became known, property searches intensified and privacy weakened. The sanctuary they hoped to find could be invaded before they even reached it. Indecision was no longer safe. They had three choices: abandon Canada, deny everything, or move before every detail was exposed. Then, Harry made one private call without Meghan's advisors present. It was connected to Britain, and its purpose was not simply reconciliation. He needed to know whether the palace would stand aside or interfere. That call did not produce a public agreement, but it opened a door Harry had once sworn was closed, and behind it waited the final price of leaving California. Canada offered Harry and Meghan a second escape, but this time there would be no illusion of starting untouched. They would arrive carrying royal wounds, damaged alliances, unfinished ambitions, and a question neither could answer. Were they choosing a new future or surrendering to the failure of the old one? They now stood between two imperfect choices. Remaining in California meant fighting to rebuild influence in a world that had once welcomed them but now demanded constant proof of relevance. Leaving for Canada meant redefining independence while accepting that their American rebellion had not delivered the peace they expected. Publicly, the meaning would be fought over immediately. Critics would call the move the collapse of their California dream. Supporters would describe it as a mature decision to protect their family, strengthen their security, and escape the pressure that had consumed their private lives. For Harry, Canada promised relief. It offered a chance to recover parts of himself buried beneath royal duty, family conflict, celebrity expectations, and years of public warfare. Yet that relief carried a painful truth. Moving closer to the Commonwealth might reveal that, despite everything he had said and lost, part of him still wanted a path back toward Britain. Meghan's support reportedly came with one condition: Canada could not become a waiting room for Harry's royal return. She would keep control of her career, her voice, and the identity she had fought to build. Any relocation had to protect her independence rather than slowly place their future back in palace hands. Their children remained at the heart of the decision. A Canadian base could provide greater privacy and a stronger connection to both British and North American roots. But it would also place them inside a renewed storm of questions about titles, education, family access, and royal belonging. Harry's private call may have opened a narrow channel with Charles, but trust remained dangerously fragile. William was reportedly far less convinced, seeing the plan as another attempt to preserve royal privilege without accepting royal responsibility. If the move came, it would likely be announced as an expansion rather than an escape, a broader family and charitable presence across North America. The language would hide the urgency. The strategy would disguise the fear. California had not failed because its opportunities disappeared. It failed because freedom itself became another performance they had to maintain. Now trusted contacts were being approached, practical options were being examined, and Canada had moved beyond nostalgia. It had become their most realistic exit, but escaping Hollywood could place them closer to the crown's shadow, and the palace might soon decide whether that shadow offered protection or punishment. Because Harry and Meghan may believe they are choosing Canada on their own terms, but in the world of royal power, no return is ever simply a return, and no escape remains private for long.